Thank you. Thank you very much. I will, in the next about 30 minutes or so, take us through an overview of about 30 plus years of work, and to a certain extent I'll be using my website as a guide. You see that the website is organized in two columns. The one on the right seeks to offer some indications of possible entry points that suggest directions that I have pursued in these 3 decades. More recently, I have been developing what I have called in 1997 bioart. There's a link at the top. In the course of the 80s and 90s, I explored what I called telepresence art. We'll address some of these issues today. These are often interactive works. Before the web became available, I created telecommunications art using video phones, fax machines, live television, and other media that preceded the internet, including a direct precursor to the internet, which is the French Minitel system. And further down, you see references to language. And that is because, in reality, I have pursued two parallel directions in my work. One that is directly connected to experimental poetry, visual poetry, initially, and then subsequently new modalities of experimental writing. And the other is firmly connected to the realm of the visual arts, even though I have sought to push the notion of the visual arts into other realms. And on the left side, the left column, these are links that will change constantly. Sometimes they'll be live, sometimes they will have reference to a current work, and very often they will have links to current exhibitions. I started to work as an artist in 1980, and I think we're finally at the position, historically speaking, to look at the 80s in a different light. The transition from the 70s, a very intense, fascinating, interesting period, into the 80s, initially was difficult to appreciate given the legacy of the 70s. But now we can more firmly see that the early 80s were a period of transition, of significant transition. As a young artist working in that environment, I realized that there were two major breakthroughs happening parallel to each other that one day I believed would be connected. One was the rise of the personal computer, which I saw initially as a portable studio that could synthesize all the different art forms: sound, movement, interaction, three-dimensionality, text, all of this could come together. Separate from that, we had the early days of the global networks, which were not yet fully connected as we have them today. In my vision, the day would come when these two would connect, and the computer would no longer be a portable studio, a nomadic studio, but it would enable a window into the other. And I established as a challenge for myself to develop this kind of intersubjective art form for the media age. Coming from a background that was informed by philosophy and literature, more specifically poetry, these are some examples of the work that I was doing in the early 80s. These are all from 81, 80, 81, 82, 83. And this is a pictogram sonnet. If you look at the rhyme, you realize that it begins with nature, progresses to a parking lot, a sign of civilization and modification of nature, proceeds to a sign of something going in, alludes to eating, proceeds to a sign of something coming out, and concludes with fertilization. So this is the creation of a sun, and you see it's 4-4-3-3. It has a visual rhyme. It's the kind of work that I was doing in the early 80s. But interesting as this was to me at the time, I also realized that I was primarily in these works operating within a Gutenbergian paradigm. And as this new world was giving its early signs, I wanted not just to reflect this new world, I wanted to actively participate in the creation of this new world. So I started to create different kinds of poetic experiences. So, for example, this is one such work. We are watching now, video documentation, but the work is not video. This is what I called in 1983 holographic poetry, poetry written with light in space. And what you see in these changes, again, this is not video. You have to imagine that I strapped a camera to your head and I'm recording video as you move about in front of the work. You move from left to right, you stretch your legs up and down, you squat down, you're dancing in front of the work. Reading becomes a kinesthetic experience. Language dissolves, disappears, changes constantly in relation to your bodily motion. This is one example of early work. And to give you one final example of work in digital poetry that I was developing at the time, you have to imagine that, again, this is not video, this is interactive work. So you have to imagine that somebody is actually moving through this work, and this is being recorded in real time. So the experience of the text is one that is in constant motion. It depends on the choices that you make as you navigate, links that you establish as you discover the material, through the strategies that you develop, that you improvise in real time, through text that constantly escapes your attempt to seize it, to control it, to tame it. I spent some time showing you these works because language has always been a very important part of my work, but not in a conceptual sense, in a poetic, literary sense. And you realize through these dissolutions, these transformations, these acts of disappearance, appearance and disappearance, these oscillations, you realize that my vision of language is one in which language resists ascription of meaning. Language resists even the perceptual attempt to make it stop and let itself be fully read. So I seek to create the experience of language as something that is in constant flow, in constant transformation, that escapes us, that escapes our attempt to impose and fix a semantic sphere. And as I was developing these works, I started to ask myself, well, language in this form, in this specific form of having discrete sounds that are represented by discrete graphic marks and that evolve into complex forms, that is indeed a human characteristic. But other creatures, non-humans, they have other ways through which they interact. And these other ways are complex, interesting, and they have evolved in their own environments. And what could art be like, I asked myself as a young artist, if we could tap into these other modalities of communication that are not exclusively based on human structures and human signs and human modes of interaction. And as I asked this question, another correlate question came up, and that had to do with the sensorial aspect of the artistic experience. If you think about it, all art, all of it, from cave paintings to Goya to Velázquez to Pollock and onwards, all of it has always been made within the human visual spectrum. We're talking about, give or take, say, 450 nanometers to about 660 nanometers. All of it, all art. But the world is a lot more interesting, a lot more complex than that. When a bee lands on a flower, for example, the bee doesn't see what we see. The bee sees other patterns, ultraviolet patterns, that we are unable to perceive. So the world out there is a lot richer, more interesting, more complex. We simply don't have access to it. And I asked myself, well, what could art be like if we could, on the one hand, recognize the aesthetic dimension in the non-human, and at the same time sensitize ourselves to this richer, larger, bigger world? So, from language and this attempt to push language into other realms that dissolves and extends and expands what language can be and do, I started to create works like this, for example. This is a diagram for a piece called Essay Concerning Human Understanding from 1994. The piece is predicated on actual geographic distance. Let's say Chicago, New York, LA, Chicago, Paris, actual physical geographic distance. So in one gallery, we find a canary in a cage, comfortable, large cage, and miles and miles and miles away, we have a plant. They are connected through the network. The canary sings. The plant is exposed to the singing of the bird remotely, and an electrode touching the leaf of the plant is sensing the microvoltage fluctuation of the plant, that is, the electrical fluctuation of the plant, and that is connected to a computer that is triggering sounds that in real time that travel back to the cage, and the bird is exposed to that. So they experience a kind of interspecies, sonic, interactive, telematic dialogue. So it's a work of interspecies communication. We have bird and plant into distinct locations. And you see that there's a disk that separates the bird from the electronics, and the plant responds in real time to the sounds. And interestingly, I used a program for this called IBVA, Interactive Brainwave Analyzer. So I used a program that was designed to monitor human brainwaves to detect the electrical fluctuation of the plant and send sounds back to the bird. So for me, this was the creation of an artwork for non-humans. That is, I'm not going to be a speciesist, to use a term that Peter Singer has circulated. That is, I will not discriminate based on species, but the work was not created primarily for humans. The work was created for the sensorial world of non-humans. What's interesting concerning human presence is that everything that one does in this environment immediately affects the experience that one has, be it one, in this case, being plant, human, or bird. When humans surround a cage, for example, the bird doesn't want to sing. It freaks out because it can't tell what's going on, It just doesn't sing at all. If you touch the plant, you alter its electrical field momentarily, and that affects the sound just like that, actually. So you don't initially realize, because we're so accustomed to walk into a museum and looking at the work of art, and our actual physical presence there plays fundamentally no role in the work that we are seeing physically, perceptually, materially, is what I'm saying. But in this case it does, which is to say that the simple act of looking at something plays a direct role in what the thing is and becomes. We always participate actively, even when we don't realize that we do. So I'm very interested in, you see that from this dissolution of language and this opening into the other non-human, other modes of networking that are not primarily tied to the human, in which interactions and modes of co-presence that humans and non-humans share, there is an emerging property in the work that Essay Concerning Human Understanding taps into. I followed Essay Concerning Human Understanding with Teleporting an Unknown State, also from 1994. And in this work you have a situation. Here's a photograph. You have a structure in the gallery, and you have a pedestal, but you could do this from your iPad or your phone as well. It's a living plant in a totally dark environment, and you are invited to click on the names of the cities. It could be with your phone. You recognize this environment. It could be with different media, but fundamentally, the plant is in the dark. You click on the names of the cities, and you're triggering a webcam in real time, say from Tokyo or Paris, and you're sending light from the sky of different cities around the world to a plant that is in total darkness in a local gallery. You see the sky from that city. The plant receives the stream of light from that sky, and you see the plant receiving that light. So you could be in a cab in Chicago sending light from the sky of Tokyo to a plant in Paris, for example. And you realize that I talked earlier about my early use of telecommunications media, and when you think about how traditional mass media operate, going from one to many, radio and television primarily, here we have the opposite situation. We have a situation in which we go from many to one. It's almost like a Facebook for plants before such a thing existed, if you will. So we create a global network of individuals that converge on the pedestal in a gallery. And all they do is send light from around the world to support this life form in total darkness. It cannot do photosynthesis without this light being sent to it. So this reversal, once you think of the traditional modality of mass media, going from one to many, and you go here from many to one, the exact opposite, the mirror image of this unidirectional mode of communication, we basically undermine this image that we have consolidated of the internet as a global mall. Here you are redistributing natural resources where they are needed. So the internet is not just a place to buy items, but a place to support life, literally, biological life. Rara Avis is from 1996 and continues to explore this this vision of a society, of a networked society in which humans and non-humans coexist. Rara avis, which you know means rare bird in Latin, is a piece. You come to the gallery and you see this, this very large aviary. You put on the VR headset, and you find yourself in the body of the parrot, of the macaw. It is a tele-robot. This is not bad video. This is video recorded in real time. The hesitations of the gaze. When the person with the headset moves his or her head from left to right, the parrot does the same thing. Let's say it parrots your movement. This work is on the internet, and control and voice and vision are coming and leaving the body of the parrot. The parrot is a hub, a dynamic hub. So somebody from Sweden could say something, the parrot would repeat that, and the bird could fly away scared, which could trigger a human to get closer or far away. Everything is interconnected. And sometimes there were large gatherings in the body of the macaw, and humans and birds alike could hear what these individuals were saying.
How many people can listen to this conversation at the same time? Is it only like point to point, or everybody that's shown on screen?
There's too many people, that's what it is.
Doug, are you there?
Yeah, where's this gallery at that showing here? Where's this at? It looks like an art gallery. Is that your house?
That's an art gallery. You're looking from the view of a robotic bird. You're seeing through its eyes.
Where's that at?
It's in an art gallery in Atlanta.
That's pretty...
The dude's girlfriend comes in, the other says, "Hey dude, is that your house?" No, it's an art gallery. This was in fact the Center for Contemporary Art in Atlanta. So imagine all these people are gathered inside the body of the macaw, having this conversation. Everything is coming out of its mouth. The birds are exposed to this. Humans are trying to figure out what's going on. So the work brings the local and the remote, the human and the non-human, the living and the robotic. All of this comes together to produce a cultural space back in 1996 that I believe progressively will be our de facto society. In those days, if museums had a fax machine, it was a miracle. So I actually had to cable the museum by hand myself in order to do this kind of work in the museum. But I thought that historically it was necessary to transform the museum, to enable the museum to support this kind of work. So this is from 1996. So progressively, you see that from the dissolution of language and pushing language into other realms, to exploring non-human communication, to further developing modalities of networking in which humans and non-humans come together, I arrived at a crossroads in 1997. And this is the work that represents that particular point in time for me. Time Capsule from '97 was a piece in which I implanted a microchip in my own body, live on television and live on the internet. I allowed internet participants, all of this live, to read the content of this digital microchip that was now inside my body, to read it, to extract that information from my body and externalize it on a screen, and transformed then, ultimately, my own body in a hub through which this information could come and go. information coming from the internet, which is the request, and information flowing back into the internet, which was the content of the microchip. I also registered myself in a database for the recovery of lost animals. I am allergic to cats, even though that's my last name. Yeah, go figure, go figure. So my choices were dog or, dare I say, rabbit. But rabbit was not an option in the database, so I registered myself as the dog and the owner simultaneously. There you go. So this piece, for me, represented a turning point. It was in the context of this work that I created the term bioart, because I felt that digital, having been working at that point with digital for about 15 years, I saw what I called a kind of digital mannerism beginning to develop. And I felt that it was time for a visceral turn, an exploration of the body as we had not seen before. So rather than creating body art or modifying the surface of the body, I wanted this time to dive into the body and start working with metabolic and molecular aspects of the body. The piece, as you will see, also touches on questions of memory. Behind me in the gallery, there are 7 sepia tone photographs. These photographs. These images my grandmother brought from Poland with her in 1939, just before the war broke. That's her. So the microchip is a memory microchip. And I implanted this memory microchip in front of these images. Photographs externalize memory. The microchip internalize memory. But of course, as we contemplate these images, we internalize them. And the content of the microchip, live on TV and live on the internet, was also externalized when its content was retrieved. So I wanted with this to signal that we were on the verge of profound transformations, not only in regards to privacy, our understanding of the body, the opportunity to create an entirely new art form, which I called bioart, but the very notion of memory was about to undergo change.
Vamos voltar à Casa das Rosas, onde o artista Eduardo Kac está implantando chip no tornozelo. Como é que está andando a coisa aí, Celso Catelli? Boa noite.
Bom, o processo começa aqui na Casa das Rosas. Luciana Bonafé, eu estou ao lado. O Eduardo está fazendo a incisão e eu estou ao lado do médico Paulo Gouveia, que vai explicar o que está sendo feito. Doutor Paulo?
Agora ele está rompendo a pele, vai percorrer com a agulha paralelamente à parte superior da pele, vai percorrer num ângulo paralelo a essa pele, vai introduzir totalmente a agulha no tecido subcutâneo. Aí, ao final do término da inserção da agulha, ele vai segurar, vai apertar, aí vai fazer a introdução do chip através de um mandril que corre por dentro da agulha. Aí, terminado, que isso que ele terminou de fazer agora ele vai pressionar para que não haja sangramento e vai retirar a agulha. Um procedimento absolutamente sem risco, inócuo, esterilizado, sem contaminação. Agora, com licença, que eu tenho que ajudar o paciente.
Perfeito, Luciana, vocês acompanharam ao vivo aí a colocação desse microchip que o artista... Pois não, Luciana.
O chip já está lá dentro agora?
Já está lá dentro, o chip já está lá dentro de...
So all this is happening on live TV and live on the internet, and this is a third segment.
Das Rosas, Celso Catelli, já foi possível captar alguma imagem através do chip que foi implantado aí no corpo do artista Eduardo Kac, não?
Sim, Luciana, já é possível captar a imagem. Eduardo, já é possível captar as informações
The blue
do chip
item there is a
no
scanner.
computador. Então, o trabalho do artista plástico Eduardo Kac aqui na Casa das Rosas. Eu vou pedir para o Sérgio Pelma, nosso cinegrafista, mostrar mais uma vez a tela do computador. Qual é o processo, qual é a conclusão desse processo, o que está acontecendo agora aí?
And that's the number. That is the content of the microchip, a number, a sequence of 9 digits.
Luciana, alguma pergunta?
Celso, apenas agradecendo, desejando boa sorte, e eu pessoalmente prefiro viver a moda antiga. Mas é uma boa experiência, sem dúvida nenhuma, uma experiência inédita. Obrigada, Celso, boa noite para você, e amanhã a gente volta com o Jornal 10.
So between the political scandal du jour, soccer matches, and ads, we cut live to the gallery where the artist is implanting a microchip. So I created the term bioart in this context because my work was opening up towards a new area, a new development, a new sense of life, a new understanding that life in the 21st century, our insights about life in the 21st century would render an entirely new picture of what life is and can be. In 1998, I wrote a manifesto called Transgenic Art, through which I more clearly specified exactly what I wanted to do within bioart, and that was the creation of new beings, new life forms, through processes, a process known as transgenesis. That is, often the taking of genetic sequences that we find in one species and moving that to another species to endow it with a novel characteristic. Genesis was the first transgenic work that I presented publicly. So what is going on here? If we look at this diagram, then we get a sense, a better sense of what's going on in this work. The work starts with a sentence from the Bible, from the book of Genesis. It is a passage in which God gives man total control over all life forms on earth. I don't own a Bible, so I went online, found a King James version, copy and pasted into Microsoft Word. Well, to combine King James and Bill Gates may have been enough for a piece of conceptual critical art. However, not satisfied, I persevered and translated that to Morse code. Morse code, standard Morse code as we know it, dots and dashes. And then I created, which you see here in the box, I created my own code to go from the two elements of Morse, the dot and the dash, to the 4 genetic bases, which is what you see down here. And my code is partially motivated and partially arbitrary, meaning that because the letter T, that represents the base thymine, the letter T is made of straight lines, I use the dash to encode it. And because the letter C, which represents the base cytosine, is round, I use the dot to encode it, and that is the motivated part of my code. The other half is arbitrary, meaning that I simply establish myself that The space between the words is going to be the letter A for adenine, and the space between the letters is going to be the letter G for guanine. So if you go from this to this, and you have now this code, you convert all the dots and the dashes, like as you see here, CTCC, that's dot, dash, dot, dot. And where a letter ends, you put the G. So you go CTCC, dot, dash, dot, dot, space. And where the word ends, you put an A, which is right there. So you go dot, dash, dot, dot, space, dash, space. This way you go from 2 to 4. There's no question where you have a letter, where you have a word. And as I did this back in 1999, I was working on the computer, and I have this text, this sequence on my computer screen. So I emailed it to a company specialized in DNA synthesis. 2 weeks later, I received a vial in the mail. And you might be wondering what was in that vial. Well, it was indeed white powder. In 1999, you could send white powder in the mail. And as I look at this vial and I see the Genesis DNA synthesized, it's your own private Shakespearean moment, to gene or not to gene, because you see disembodied DNA, and you're always told that DNA regulates everything, DNA explains life, is the book of life, all these metaphors that we are constantly bombarded with. But when you have it disembodied in your hand, you realize that outside of the body can't do anything at all. So it needs a context. And of course, the body needs a context as well. So now, when you look at Genesis, the artwork more fully, you begin to understand what happens. In the space, I have the entire sequence. You see it's glowing because I have black lights. You have the Petri dish with the Genesis bacteria that I created using the synthetic DNA. And you can, from home or from the gallery, activate a UV light box remotely. And this being shortwave, high frequency, you are causing mutation. In other words, with one click from the comfort of your home, in Chicago, you can change the word of God in the bacteria, say in an exhibition in Paris. That DNA, that sequence, got synthesized, introduced in the bacteria, spliced with GFP, which allows the bacteria to glow green, as you can see, and you gain access to the living body of the bacteria through the internet. With the same simple gesture of buying a book or sending an email, one click, you change the word of God in the body of the bacteria in another country through the internet. So I created a whole series of works on paper and sculptures and based on this. But fundamentally, we have a situation, if you revisit momentarily what I have described, that is, you had text on the screen, you entered that text in the living body, you altered that text in the living body, and you retrieved it. That is input, processing, and output. That's what you do all the time with a computer, except that here you're doing with a living organism. So the idea that this distinction between information processing, the world of non-living technology, so to speak, and the world of the living, that these represent unsurmountable barriers, clearly, in the 21st century, that is no longer the case. These once firm boundaries are disappearing not in an abstract way, not through science fiction, but in a very concrete, material, physical, ordinary, daily life way. And that has profound philosophical implications. I followed Genesis with GFP Bunny. GFP Bunny is a work in which I created a green glowing rabbit. And I want to make sure that you know that this is not my home. This ugly wallpaper is the lab in France where Alba was born, and that only under blue light she glows green. In fact, I created what I call the creation trilogy. Genesis in '99, Jeff P. Bunny in 2000, and the 8th Day in 2001. And in all three works, I used GFP, or green fluorescent protein. In Genesis, I worked with bacteria, that is, with individual bacteria, with a bacterium, the smallest, that represents the smallest life form, is a unicellular organism. With Jeff P. Bunny, a mammal that glows green, so a complex life form at the other spectrum, at the other end of the spectrum of the complexity of life. And with the 8th Day, I created an entire ecology in which all creatures glow green. So basically, hardly a week goes by that there isn't a request in some way or another about Jeff P. Bunny. And here's a short summary of the different types of responses that this work received from 2000 to about 2004 or so.
This is the BBC World Service.
Have you heard of Alba the bunny? Alba lives at an agricultural institute near Paris, and she looks like any other plain old white rabbit. Well, that's until you put her under a blue light, at which point dear little Alba begins to glow green. And it's not in the name of science, before you ask, but in the name of art.
We touched on the genetic engineering controversy earlier in the broadcast. When we saw this story in yesterday's edition of the Boston Globe, we thought, surely not. On the contrary, surely. Here's ABC's Bill Blakemore.
Directors of the lab in France that created the rabbit are not letting anyone in to see it. But you can see a picture of the rabbit, Alba, on the website of the artist in Chicago, Eduardo Kac, who commissioned the lab to create her.
When you start to genetically engineer animals as part of an artwork, I think that you're really beginning to cross a line that isn't necessary to cross.
But animal rights groups say that Alba's artistic visibility may publicize her plight as a lab animal.
If this has been highlighted in this experiment, then it is helpful for laboratory animals everywhere.
Email us at this address, outlook@bbc.co.uk. Time now to talk about a rabbit that's got a few people into a bit of a stew. That's because this rabbit is at the centre of a project that sparked off a debate involving art and science. Spell out, if you will, the artistic message of this project.
Well, there are several messages, but one of them is the fact that Alba, like any other transgenic animal, has a cognitive and emotional life that must be acknowledged in a social space.
God in the 21st century, it looks like you and your buddies do, huh? The rabbit genome has existed for how many billions of years, and why do you think you're so important that you can mess with it? I think you're a pawn of these biotechnology companies, and I'm sure you probably didn't have to pay very much for this to happen, because I'm sure they'd love to tout it as another one of their successes.
When ancestral man picked up a stone and called it a tool, we radically changed this planet ever since that time, okay? And when we accepted the line from Genesis that we hold dominion over all the animals and the fish of the sea, as a society, this is generally what we do, all societies. And we must question each and every technological advance. And we haven't done a good job of it. And I'm glad that you are doing this project to bring these issues to the forefront, to produce these forums when we can hash these problems out. Because prior to this, there isn't enough discussion.
This is Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, the NPR News Quiz.
So you ready to play, Yura? Sure. All right, here's your first limerick.
Old Noah cried out, "Oh, dagnabbit, we really must learn to cohabit. If you glow in the dark, come on down to the ark. I've got space for a mutant green
rabbit? Yes. Unbelievable as it may sound, it's true. Alba is an albino rabbit that under regular light just looks furry and cute. But turn on the black light and Alba's eyes...
Of course, this will have lots of implications, cultural, philosophical implications. Hopefully, we'll be able to address some of them as we sit down to have a conversation. And as we approach the end of the presentation, I'll show you a few seconds of the 8th day and a few seconds of natural history of the enigma. The 8th day is composed, you walk into the space and you see this blue bubble floating in total darkness. So my hope is that you would see the image of a new Earth. And you have green glowing mice, green glowing plants, green glowing fish, and green glowing amoeba that inhabit the body of what I call a biobot, a biological robot. The legs of the robot are controlled by the amoeba, and the eyes of the robot are controlled by humans, locally and on the internet as well. So there is a sense of a different, emerging network in which humans and non-humans come together anew. If, for many people, the creation of a green glowing mammal in GFP Bunny, her name is Alba, if that evoked images of the different, of the other, in the 8th day, because all creatures glow green, to be different, to be the other, is to not glow green, because normalcy is obviously given by quantity. So within this world, we are the other, we are the different. And finally, my most recent work of bioart is Natural History of the Enigma. I worked for 6 years at the University of Minnesota to create this piece without ever knowing if I would be successful. This is Edunia. Edunia is a new life form that has elements of your very own, Eduardo, and a petunia. The central work in the natural history... My objective was to start with my red veins, with my blood, and move a fragment of my DNA to the red veins of the flower, only the veins.
The Edunia expresses my DNA exclusively
not only
its red veins.
Not only to be present in the veins, but to be integrated into the chromosome, and to actually express my sequence in its veins. That is, to produce the same protein that it produces in my body to produce in the body of the flower. We have separated from plants in the history of evolution a long time ago, very, very early in the 2 billion plus years of our existence as living entities on Earth. And here we have a situation in which we go back together again. This is why I call Edunia a plantimal. This is a plant that has animal characteristics. And because such a thing does not exist in nature, we have something new added to the world. We have a new life form added to the world. And in a very concrete material sense, it seeks to change the world. The work is philosophical in the sense that, ontologically speaking, we have a new being that emerges from the artwork. and exists in the world just like you and I. What does this mean for an artist to imagine a creature, engage the procedures to bring this creature into the world, and effectively have her in the world, share the world, be part of the world, modify the world, experience the world, just like you and I? In all of my studies, in all these decades, I have been unable to find a single society, a single civilization that has not produced an imaginary being. And in the course of pursuing bioart, we have transformed life from mythology into a medium. We have transformed this vision of new beings from legend to life. It is my belief that in a world in which we destroy at least one species every day, one role that artists can exert is to expand biodiversity, to produce new types of relationships, to configure, to envision, to bring about new modalities of networking in which these old-fashioned separations between the living and the non-living, the local and the remote, the biological and the robotic are dissolved, and a new model, a more open model of interspecies communication can be brought to the fore and better correspond to the life that we seek to develop in the 21st century. Thank you so much.
I think that might leave us. We're now just going to, I think, have time for maybe one or two questions. The presentation went longer, but it was quite an incredible presentation, Eduardo, I have to say. So, yeah, let's grab the seats and do that. So, yeah. So at this point, we'll just open it up directly to the floor. So I think we have somebody over here. And if you could just hold on one sec for the microphone.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was struck by the title of one of your works, an essay concerning human understanding, the title also of a work by John Locke, and I wondered how you see the relationship of bioart to the empiricist philosophical tradition.
Are we on? Yes. I'm interested in how the Western philosophical canon has looked at the question of this relationship between humans and, lacking a better term, non-human animals. We're also animals, so we have to, in order to talk about the non-human, we have to go out of our way to describe that. And you basically find in Leibniz and Locke and even Nietzsche less, but you still find a hierarchy of values that places the human in a higher ground. There is the perception that we have the power of abstract thought. There is the perception that we have language and they lack. So there's always a perception that we have something of greater value and the non-human lacks something that we possess. We find this basically throughout the Western philosophical canon, and I disagree. I think that we have characteristics that have served us better or not so well in the course of our development, evolution, history. But other creatures have other characteristics. For example, as I described earlier, when a bee lands on a flower. So I hesitate to think of life vertically, hierarchically that way. I think of it more horizontally, more of a network, more of a spectrum. And I tend to see that different life forms have what Uxco called an Umwelt. That is, each life form has a sensorial world of its own. We have ours, and we enjoy it as much as we can, but at the same time is limited. We can only see up to a point, we can only smell up to a point. The dog has a olfactory perception that is so much greater than ours. So there are these multiple worlds, if you will, that coexist. And I think through the work, through the physicality and sensorial dimension of the work, I seek to undo these dualities that we have inherited from Locke and others.
And we have time for one more question over here.
I'm just fascinated to learn where you're going next.
Well, I am often uncomfortable in talking about work that is not accomplished yet. But let me just say that I am working. I am trying to make a new piece of bioart. But these works take a long time. Natural history of the Enigma was 6 years of work. And it could probably be another 6, 7, 8, even 10 years before my new work is completed. So I'm in it, but I need a little more time to talk about it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming out.